Today, we're gathered here in Southern California, beautiful Southern California, to hear from victims of this year's Pacific Palisades. Before we start, I'd like to recognize my friend and fellow member of the Senate Aging Committee, Senator Ron Johnson. I want to thank him for being here. He is the chairman of the committee. We don't get to do these investigations unless the chair of the committee is receptive to doing the investigation. And he's got the subpoena power to make sure that we can get all the facts. Without that, you're never guaranteed you're going to get all the facts. He's the chairman of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Permanent Committee, Subcommittee on Investigations. And together, we have opened an investigation to the Pacific Palisades wildfire that ravaged the Pacific Palisades community in Los Angeles, California, and unfortunately took the lives of 12 people. The most tragic part, you can rebuild homes, you can't rebuild a life. When I was governor of Florida, we had 4 major hurricanes, and the whole goal was keep everybody alive. Focus on keeping everybody alive because you can rebuild everything. I'd also like to recognize Spencer Pratt. Without Spencer, we wouldn't be here today. In August, I flew down and Spencer gave me a tour of the Palisades. And the first thing is, you can't believe this is like this. You know, after a hurricane, you know, you get the power back on as fast as you can. You get people back in their homes as fast as you can. You get their businesses open as fast as you can. You streamline the permits. You have insurance tents. Everybody brings in the insurance people, and you get the permits done, and you get moving. And so when I came here in August, you're just fascinated that is just empty. We did a tour this morning, and there's a little bit more being done now, but it's nothing. 10 months into, I guess it's 10 months into this. I just want to thank Spencer because it's his tenacity that has, I think, given the victims a voice, and it's the reason why Senator Johnson and I are here today. So I want to thank you for being the voice for the victims and your passion to get to the bottom of what happened, and for being here. Now I'd like to recognize you for an opening statement.
Last time I talked, I blacked out, so I wrote some notes down this time. Thank you, Chairman Scott. Thank you, Senator Johnson, and everyone who took the time to show up today. While I'm so grateful you're here, I'm also baffled why it's only senators from thousands of miles away who are willing to show up for the Palisades, while our own senator from just 30 miles away has abandoned us entirely. Perhaps we shouldn't be surprised. Wisconsin had the worst wildfire in human history back in Peshtigo in 1871. But with many years of responsible forest management, your state, Senator Johnson, has relegated those mega fires to the dustbin of history. And after a massive wildfire outbreak in the 90s, Chairman Scott's state of Florida has led the nation in aggressive prescribed fire, proactively burning 2 million acres every year and immunizing your communities from these devastating fires in a way that we simply just can't figure out. So perhaps it's only fitting that you're here, as we clearly have much to learn from you. Despite having routine fires every few decades, the state park has failed to do any real prescribed fire or fuels mitigation to protect our community. And on January 1st, they didn't even have the decency to extinguish a small brush fire that ignited just above us, letting it continue to burn unchecked for a week ahead of the forecasted Santa Ana winds that eventually rekindled the fire and destroyed our town on January 7th. As you know, my family and I lost our home and everything we own in the Palisades fire. It's been 10 months, and our government leaders, instead of helping us rebuild, have only served to make the rebuilding process so painful and slow that many just quit and are forced out of their hometown through attrition. So vultures like Gavin Newsom and Scott Wiener have a blank slate to remake the Palisades in the vision of their wealthy donors and foreign investors. Gavin Newsom receives billions in federal funds for fire mitigation, but it would have only cost $200,000 to cut a fire break around our town, and it would have saved the Palisades. The work never gets done, and we all pay the price. Many people shrug this off. Oh, the Palisades are full of rich folks. They'll be fine. They don't know the Palisades. Many of us are not rich. We simply lived here our whole lives. This place used to be cheap. Houses get passed on from generation to generation. It's a tightly knit family community, and none of us ever leave. I mean, why would you? Look at this view. We were born here, raised here. We were raising our families here, and we all expected to die here one day, but not like this. By the grace of God, my family survived. The 12, the Palisades family were killed in the fire. Nearly all of them elderly or disabled, left to die in their homes. These 12 people deserved to feel safe in their homes, but were instead lost in fire. It was the direct result of gross negligence and mismanagement by our state and our local government. I'm here to honor their memory by ensuring that their deaths were not in vain and that their failures that led to this disaster are fully exposed and corrected. My parents also lost their home in the Palisades fire. The fire took the home they built their lives in, incinerating decades of irreplaceable memories, family history, and the foundation of their retirement. For an older person, losing the stability of your home is not just a hardship. It is a trauma that can fundamentally derail the final years of your life. This hearing is about the Palisades fire, but it also goes beyond the Palisades. This is about accountability, preparation, and dignity in disaster recovery wherever and whenever it might occur. The widespread destruction of the Palisades fire was enabled by a series of cascading failures. For decades, the state allowed brush to grow wild with no preventative measures. Critically, for at least a year before the fire, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power drained our reservoirs. A small fire ignited on January 1st was abandoned, embers visibly smoldering and waiting to be rekindled with no management or supervision by Topanga State Park. When the disaster hit, water supplies were inadequate, and we had a severe lack of first responders due to a series of unfortunate choices made by our state and local leaders. After the fire, residents were left dealing with the consequences of being uninsured and underinsured, making it impossible for them to recoup the value of their homes. All this has left thousands of Palisades residents, many senior citizens on fixed incomes, facing the impossibility of rebuilding their lives. For those able to rebuild, the process is an absolute nightmare. Permits are delayed. Local bureaucracy is moving at a crawling pace. There are complex questions of soil toxicity and foreign investors buying all the land. These are not political issues. They are issues of humanity and decency. I remember, Senator Scott, when we met in your office in DC, you shared that when a town gets destroyed in your state from a hurricane, the pitchforks come out if it's not all rebuilt within 3 months. That's like science fiction to us. Just up the canyon at Malibu Lake, there's still dozens of burnout lots from the Woolsey fire that hit 7 years ago. Lots that still look like the Palisades does now. Up north in Paradise, 75% of the town is just barren, untouched lots 7 years after their big fire. It's hard to see that and believe our town will ever be rebuilt in our lifetime. It's hard not to feel abandoned by our state and local politicians, and it's hard to not lose hope. Thank you to the committee for providing the Palisades with a voice and a glimmer of hope. All we want to do is rebuild our town the way we remember it. Protect our neighbors from these predictable and preventable fires. I'm grateful that you are using your power to investigate what went wrong and how to prevent tragedies like this from happening. I'm grateful that you are shedding a light on all the issues we're facing. We will do our part, and we will continue advocating for our community. We will not be lost or forgotten.
You know, I was governor of Florida for 8 years, and I've been in the Senate now. This is my 7th year. And what I tell everybody is, if you want better government, you got to do what Spencer's doing. You got to get in the middle of it. If you, everybody can be a voice. We're going to, Senator Johnson and I are going to do everything we can, but the more active the citizens are, and Austin Rogers is here. He's the general counsel in my office. If anybody has any information that you want us to get out, We are going to get to the bottom of this. It's not right what happened. 12 people should not have died. Um, and I just want to again thank Spencer and everybody that is active, and we'll do everything we can. Now, I'd like to thank the American Legion for hosting us today. This post has been a pillar of the community and has supported recovery since the fires. Now, I'd like to recognize a member from the Legion to talk to give a few words. But I want to thank you for hosting this.
Thank you. Yeah, in case you were wondering why I'm standing here, I went into Marine mode and I'm doing some security off to the side. I'll send you the bill, sir. But one of the important things that we wanted to convey, and I talked to our staff judge advocate, who's our attorney, that anytime leaders, regardless of political affiliation, want to come by our posts and be a part of the recovery effort, be a part of leading us into different avenues of the future, we welcome that. So the American Legion is a nonpartisan organization. And if you haven't heard of us, we're the largest veteran resource organization in the country with millions and millions strong. We're chartered by Congress. So I am the commander, Joe Ramirez. I'm also the CEO of this organization. I don't live here. I live like 15 minutes away here. So I wasn't affected, but I was affected when it comes to this idea that we all had to pull together and bring in community leaders to rally and try to figure this out, including the long-term recovery group, which I'm sure you'll hear from later on. And that's about it. I'm ready to sit down and turn it back over to you, Senator Scott. And I can't even tell you, Spencer Pratt, wherever you went, how powerful his words were, and also the power of social media, right? The power of social media, getting the word out and being engaged. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. So, by the way, I'm on Armed Services Committee, and you should be very proud of the Marines. Everything they're required to do, they do. They can do an audit. They can do everything they can, and so all the other branches are going to have to step up to be as good as the Marines are. They always do a great job. The U.S. Senate Special Committee on Aging will now come to order. Natural disasters do not discriminate. It doesn't matter how old you are, how much money you have, or how smart you think you may be. If you aren't prepared, nothing else matters. And while being prepared starts with you and is vital for everyone, it is also very important that your local, state, and federal governments do all they can to prevent disasters. And for those disasters that can't be prevented, they must be prepared to respond. I believe the Palisades fire was more than just a horrific tragedy. It was an unacceptable failure of government to protect the lives and property of its citizens. And we all know that this fire hurt our seniors more than anyone else. Families in this community deserve answers and accountability. Over the years, billions upon billions of federal taxpayer dollars have been directed to California to support fire management and disaster mitigation efforts. Yet on the day of the Pacific Palisades fire, reservoirs were empty. Fire hydrants went dry, and innocent people, including many vulnerable seniors, perished, while thousands more lost their homes, businesses, and everything they owned. While nothing can undo the damage done by the Pacific Palisades fire, I am committed to advocating for the victims, their families, and this community to get answers and make sure this never happens anywhere in our great country ever again. As a senior senator from Florida and former governor, I am no stranger to disasters. Throughout my 8 years as governor and 6 years serving Floridians in the U.S. Senate, I've seen the destruction left behind by multiple devastating hurricanes in the Sunshine State. If there's one lesson I've learned, it's that preparedness saves lives. And after every disaster, you have to talk to people and see how you can be better next time. I was way better on my fourth hurricane than I was on my first hurricane. If there's no alternative to getting prepared and having a disaster plan, when disasters strike, the things around us can be replaced. But if you don't protect your life, there is no second chance. I tell Floridians constantly during hurricane season, you can rebuild your home, but you cannot rebuild your life. I cannot tell you how many Floridians I have talked to that barely survived hurricanes and wish they had done more to be prepared. The goal is always to keep people alive and save our homes and businesses. Today, we're here in beautiful Southern California to hear from victims of the Palisades fire, As chairman of the Senate Special Committee on Aging, I think it's important we hear from victims who were directly impacted, many losing everything they had. I am so thankful to have the witnesses that are coming before us today and have them share their stories. Now I'd like to recognize Senator Ron Johnson for his opening statement.
Well, thank you, Senator Scott. I think Spencer kind of asked the question, why do we have a senator from Wisconsin and a senator from Florida coming here to Palisades to open up an investigation on this? I want to tell the story because I think it makes a couple important points. Senator Scott was in the Philippines on a foreign trip, and one of his staff members, who is too modest to be named, was watching a podcast with Spencer Pratt when he was describing all this. And because Senator Scott hires staff with the heart, with real compassion, that resonated with her. She contacts Senator Scott, who she knew was going to be flying back and stopping in Los Angeles, and set up that meeting. And so Senator Scott, who, as you now know, was governor of Florida and has dealt with disaster after disaster, got better at it, understands the problem, toured the Palisades, and now, like I've toured it, shocked. I mean, literally shocked. I mean, where's all the recovery? Where's all the construction? Where's all the building? I will say that in terms of having somebody in Congress, in the Senate, overseeing this investigation, this is really his investigation because he's got the expertise. You could not find somebody better. And so he contacted me. I'm chairman of the Permanent Subcommittee Investigation. I do have unlimited subpoena power. I don't have to get votes or anything. I just issue the subpoenas. Now, we don't want to do that. We're hoping for cooperation. But I've been investigating now for better part of 10 years. And let's face it, government authorities are not particularly transparent. They'll turn you over documents. They'll give you, tens of thousands of pages, but not the good stuff. So I'm hoping we don't have to use that subpoena power. And we've gotten some productions, but again, nothing particularly revealing. What we need more people like Spencer. We need more people in the fire departments. And I realize they're concerned about retaliation, but we need whistleblowers. We need people from the community coming forward and telling us what they know. Documents, text messages are incredibly important because if we are forced to issue subpoenas, the fact that the people that are supposed to comply with our subpoenas, if they're thinking, well, somebody else may be sending them this email, and it's going to look pretty bad if I don't produce that documents as well. Again, I'd prefer not using those compulsory techniques, but I think we're going to have to. And why? Because we want to get to the bottom of this so we can prevent disasters like this in the future. This is completely unacceptable what happened here. This is, unacceptable negligence after unacceptable negligence layered on top of each other that resulted in this. There was an excellent article in the Wall Street Journal by, you remember, Congress Tom McClintock. And I could not even believe the statistic. This was shortly after the fires. Apparently, in the late 1800s, California was suffering for about 4.5 million acres of acres being destroyed by fire. Again, this is the late 1800s. So they took care of it. But by the late 1900s, California was only experiencing about 250,000 acres being burned. And then they abandoned all those successful techniques, and you're back up to, a fire of 4.5 million acres again. There's no reason for it whatsoever. So again, I just really want to applaud Spencer, Senator Scott's staff member, Senator Scott himself, for recognizing that this is something that we have to pay attention to. I want to thank everybody coming here to tell our stories. We're going to be listening, and hopefully by highlighting this, we can prevent this in the future, and certainly what we need to do is help Palisades recover, rebuild, but do it in a responsible way. I mean, part of the problem here is we're going to be asked, American taxpayers, to put billions of dollars into this, okay? I certainly don't trust the elected officials in California, Los Angeles, to use that money wisely. So we're going to have controls over that. I think some of our witnesses will be talking about that. But we also need to insist that they start implementing what they knew how to do 30, 40 years ago to bring that burn down to 250,000 acres a year. This can be prevented. So anyway, Senator Scott, thank you, and thank all of you for attending, and let's hope this has real meaning.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. Now I'd like to welcome our witnesses today, all of whom bring important perspectives on the challenges facing the elderly when it comes to preparing for a disaster. First, I'd like to introduce Tom Doran, right?
Yeah.
Did I say it right? Tom is a longtime resident of the Palisades and a member of this American Legion squadron. Unfortunately, like so many people here today, Tom and his family lost their home and all the memories that come with it to the Palisades fire this past January. Thank you for being here, and please begin your testimony.
Thank you, Senator Scott, Senator Johnson. My name is Tom Doran. I married into the Palisades 36 years ago. I'm here to speak on behalf of my wife's parents, Georgie and Lee Ford, 84 and 85 years old, and the generation they represent, the people who built our neighborhoods, raised our families, made our community strong, only to watch much of it vanish in the Palisades fire. Georgie and Lee both grew up in the Palisades. Lee's family settled here in the late 1930s. I never imagined that at this stage in life, when I should be planning for retirement, I'd be standing here telling you how my family lost everything in the Palisades fire, and how we're still trying to piece our lives back together 10 months later. My in-laws moved into their home over 60 years ago. It wasn't just a house, it was the center of our family's history. My wife grew up there. Both our children celebrated every birthday there. It was where holidays, graduations, and Sunday dinners took place, where life unfolded for 3 generations. My wife and I raised our family directly across the street. Our home of 26 years burned later that night. That day, there were no sirens, no real warnings, just wind, smoke, and confusion. I watched Lee manning a hose, trying to save his home as well as his neighbors. He didn't hesitate. He fought until he was forced by family to leave. Hours later, the home he built, the one my wife grew up in, was gone. I stayed with my son and son-in-law until the water gave out at 9:30 p.m., and we left our house for the safety of the American Legion Ronald Reagan Palisades Post 283. Lights were still on, water still worked here for some unknown reason. I returned at midnight to see my home catch fire, and decades of memories, hard work, stability were erased. It's hard to describe what it feels like to watch a lifetime of work and memories go up in flames. My in-laws and my family lost everything we had worked for. Every photo, keepsake, and reminder of our lives together. And for our family, 3 generations lost an anchor. That house wasn't just theirs, it was the heart of all of ours. The days and weeks that followed were filled with confusion, exhaustion, and disbelief. We were navigating insurance claims, FEMA, temporary housing, all while making sure my in-laws had their medications, medical care, and emotional support. It became clear almost immediately that these systems are not built for the elderly. Everything from online forms, digital portals, to endless hold times assumes physical mobility, technological literacy, and mental endurance that most seniors simply don't have. My father-in-law had a flip phone from 1998. My in-laws can't sit on hold for hours, upload digital photos, or manage multiple accounts. Every step in the process was overwhelming. So the family stepped in. We helped with the paperwork, the phone calls, the follow-ups, and the appointments. I'm 65 years old myself, still working full-time and trying to manage my own family's recovery because our home burned too. And even now, 10 months later, we're still cataloging every single possession we owned for insurance purposes. Every pot, every book, every photograph, line by line, while it's abundantly clear that it was a total loss. The emotional toll of having to relive what we lost just to prove it, staggering. For elderly survivors like me and laws, this process is not just inefficient, it's inhumane. The fire didn't just take their home, it took their stability, health, and confidence. My mother-in-law survived multiple strokes and needed emergency surgery just weeks after the fire. The loss of their home and independence has aged them visibly. Their routines, their sense of safety, and their place in the world, all of it changed overnight. The ripple effects have touched every generation in our family. My wife lost the home she grew up in. My children lost the home where they spent their childhood holidays. I've had to watch the people I love the most struggle to find footing in a system that doesn't seem to see them. The trauma didn't stop when the fire went out. It has stayed with us emotionally, financially, and generationally. Their story isn't unique. They are part of a generation that spent their lives doing everything right, saving, planning, maintaining their homes, and giving back to their communities. When disaster struck, they were left to navigate a world that no longer works for them. So many elderly survivors are still displaced, living in temporary rentals, isolated from their doctors, their friends, and the neighborhoods they once held together. They're scattered throughout Southern California, from Laguna Beach all the way up to, the valley and Camarillo. And without family to help, many have simply fallen through the cracks. For families like ours, that help comes with its own toll. We've become their advocates, their drivers, their case managers, all while trying to rebuild our own lives. It's a full-time job on top of a full-time job. And we're the lucky ones. We have each other. There are countless seniors out there who don't. This experience has made one thing clear: our disaster recovery systems are not built for aging populations or for the families trying to support them. Because when someone in their 80s loses everything, it's not about starting over. It's about preserving dignity, safety, and connection in the years they have left. My in-laws are still with us. They're still together. They're still showing us what strength looks like. Systems around them have not shown that same strength back. When we talk about recovery, we often focus on rebuilding structures, but recovery for the elderly is about rebuilding people, their confidence, their routines, and their sense of belonging. We owe it to them, the generation that built these communities, to make sure they are not forgotten after the flames. I ask that that the state and federal government release FEMA funding to help our community rebuild our infrastructure. We need our local and state governments to have a concrete plan for future disaster prevention, rescue, and evacuation, not just for fire, but for earthquakes and flooding. The system doesn't work. It's the people on the ground, the SBA people, there's two of them in the room over there, that they know. I come in here all the time, and they know me, and they are working, because my father-in-law, we still don't have funding. He doesn't have his loan. And it's been because my grandmother and my mother-in-law did not have a driver's license. She had stopped driving 10 years ago. So we had to wait till that. And by that time, they had closed the portal. And now we're struggling to force our way back in, so they have the funds to rebuild, to partially rebuild at least. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Tom. I mean, you never can understand why this stuff happens. So now I'd like to recognize David Schwartz. David is the chairman of the Pacific Palisades Community Council Rebuild Committee. He's played a key role in bringing residents, city officials, and relief organizations together to coordinate rebuilding efforts, address safety concerns, and ensure lessons are learned from this tragedy. Thank you for being here, and if you can begin your testimony.
No, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Johnson, for the opportunity to discuss the impacts of the Palisades fire on my neighbors and to suggest a path forward in resurrecting our community. As the chairman said, I'm the chairman of the Rebuild Committee of the Palisades Community Council. It's a non-governmental organization that was created 50 years ago to advocate for Palisadians. I am here today in my personal capacity, as PPCC has not yet taken an official position on aspects of what I'm going to say today. Until the 7th of January, my family lived just less than a half a mile from where we are. Our home was one of the few in our neighborhood to have survived the fire. But because we were in the epicenter of the burn zone, the thermal damage and fire-related contamination, including from toxic metals that have never before been seen in a fire disaster of this nature, renders our home presently unsafe to inhabit. I mention this because with the focus on the 6,800 plus homes and other structures destroyed, we ought to pay attention to the thousands of homes that remain standing. And I'm glad Spencer mentioned the unknown knowns of the environmental contamination that could affect everything, including the baseball playing field that's just a block from where we live. Those are things that I worry about. Today, I want to discuss, I should say my written submission gives my own personal observations on what went wrong. Let me just say this. The first obligation of our state government under our state constitution is to protect life and property. I'll let you answer the question and the other members of the panel speak to what happened and why that didn't happen. Instead, what I'd like to talk about is how we can get this community back on its feet. First, without expediting infrastructure repairs and construction permitting, vacant lots and unoccupied houses will give license to squatters, petty crime, and vandalism. Without fire resiliency infrastructure improvements, the cost and the availability of fire insurance will continue to remain a barrier to obtaining construction financing and home mortgages. Third, without insurance, many people will refuse to reinvest in this community, which is a designated very high fire hazard severity zone. Finally, without federal support to fund these repairs and improvements, Palisades will remain a disaster tourist destination and, frankly, an embarrassment to the host city of the 2028 Summer Olympics. Now, I'm going to say something that may buck the orthodoxy around federal disaster relief. Don't write Los Angeles a blank check. Before another dollar is appropriated, Congress should insist on 4 conditions to ensure that federal funding will actually be used to rebuild my community on budget and on time. First, Congress should insist that Governor Newsom exercise his executive power to create an independent, and I underscore that word, independent Palisades Reconstruction Authority, much as what happened in New York after 9/11. Governor Pataki created the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation to oversee the rebuild. He knew that ceding control over that project to the state or the state legislature or the vast bureaucracy in New York would lead or devolve into a political negotiation. So he bypassed the state legislature and the New York City Council. He constituted the LMDC to oversee construction and appointed a board of directors comprised of business leaders who were not beholden to interest groups to administer the distribution of federal HUD financing. And that can work here too. Second, Governor Newsom can delegate to this PPRA, the authority, certain of his emergency powers. Keep in mind, we are still under an emergency declaration, and his powers under the California Emergency Services Act are expansive. They include the ability to oversee reconstruction logistics, and to accelerate the pace of rebuilding, including by cutting through burdensome permitting requirements or providing contractors a safe harbor from some of the state's most punitive wage and hour regulations. Third, while the PPRA must be independent from City Hall, the board must be accountable to residents and to the federal government. There have to be strings attached to each tranche of federal funding so the authority will remain focused on the economic and infrastructure needs of Palisadians and business owners. Fourth, while the Palisadians should not be asked to repair streets and water systems after being so grievously let down by their elected and public safety officials, they should be willing to co-invest alongside the federal government as the long-term beneficiaries of fire resiliency improvements, such as undergrounding utilities. And there are any number of financing ways to achieve that goal. These are the sorts of conditions that President Trump insisted upon when he visited the Palisades 9 months ago. It's also what our community wants. According to a survey conducted this fall by our organization, NORC found that nearly 2/3 of residents are somewhat to extremely confident in the ability of a community-based rebuilding authority with an elected board of directors to lead a coordinated and effective rebuilding effort. Conversely, about 75% of residents have little to no confidence in the ability of state, county, or local government to lead this effort. One last thought, and thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. When he visited the Palisades in January, we cheered when President Trump said, we're going to get it fixed, though we'll get it fixed permanently so it can't happen again. As far as we know, neither Mayor Bass nor Governor Newsom has picked up the phone to ask the president how he would fix the Palisades. So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Johnson, we're asking that you take this message back to the president. Bring us your ideas, your impatience with the status quo, and your willingness to set aside the business as usual federal disaster playbook so that in partnership with you, with Congress, and with this administration, together we can rebuild this community. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, David. We will. So now I'd like to recognize Jessica Rogers. She is the president of the Pacific Palisades Resident Association and has been a leading voice for those impacted by the fire. Thank you for being here. Please begin your testimony.
Good morning. My name is Jessica Rogers, and I serve as the president of the Pacific Palisades Residents Association, a 58-year organization dedicated to protecting our environment and ensuring residents' safety. I'm also a geriatric social worker who spent over a decade as a clinical social worker for our elderly population at the local synagogue. I'm currently the vice chair of the Pacific Palisades Long-Term Recovery Group. I'm here today to speak about the catastrophic failures that endangered our most vulnerable residents on January 7th, the ongoing abandonment we continue to experience, and why we need federal intervention to ensure our community can rebuild safely. At 10:45 a.m. on January 7th, I saw billowing smoke north of El Medio Bluffs. Within 5 minutes, I knew something was terribly wrong. Within 10, the entire hillside was engulfed in flames. Here's what should horrify this committee. We never received an evacuation notice when the fire started. As I ran through my house gathering belongings, I kept checking my phone for alerts from local government. Nothing came. It wasn't until 12:30 p.m., nearly 2 hours after the fire started, that I received a notice to prepare for potential evacuation. By that time, I was already filling up my car, feeling the heat on my skin, just like I was too close to a barbecue. The mandatory evacuation notice, that didn't arrive until nearly 5 p.m. when the homes on my street were already burned and smoke made it impossible to breathe. As soon as I escaped around 1:15 p.m., I immediately took charge because local government response was inadequate. I contacted our councilwoman staff at the fire department's central command, relaying ground level information from residents. I asked neighbors to knock on doors before evacuating. Most critically, I coordinated sending firefighters and police officers, I'm so sorry. Most critically, I coordinated sending firefighters and police officers to locations where elderly people were left behind. The Palisades Highlands situation was desperate. Residents were trapped because access points were blocked by abandoned vehicles. People had been engulfed in flames with no option but to abandon their cars in the middle of the street. I made calls continuously through the night, so many that my tongue was bloodied on both sides from the cuts from my teeth. I did this because our elderly residents, that are more than a third of our population, were in grave danger and no one else was coordinating their rescue. Let me be clear. Seniors with mobility issues, those dependent on oxygen, residents with dementia who needed assistance, they all lost precious hours because of inadequate warnings. In my years as a geriatric social worker, I knew exactly who would struggle to evacuate quickly. I did everything I could to help coordinate their safety because the system failed. What happened on January 7th was a disaster. What has happened since proves local government cannot handle our recovery. We've been told the city has no funding to support us. We're still fighting for permit fee waivers 10 months after the fire. Adequate security and infrastructure funding. Every time we ask for help, we're told to self-fund. We've been charged for repairs for fire hydrant damages in the fire. The city continues to increase our taxes and raise our rates for water and power. Before the June deadline, I asked the mayor to add safety funding as a line item to request to FEMA. She refused, insisting our community needed to fund our own security. That if we wanted permit fee waivers, we would get about $86 million worth and any additional funding would have to come from us. The pattern is clear. Local government failed us on January 7th and continues to fail us. We've been forced to lead our own recovery because the city won't. Based on my experience with local government on the day of the fire and since the fire, we need federal intervention. The city and county abandoned us during the fire and continue to abandon us. Our elderly residents won't return without proper security, infrastructure, emergency systems that the city refuses to provide. When the emergency happened, residents led the response. We can lead our rebuilding, but we need direct federal funding. The mayor's refusal to request safety funding from FEMA proves that federal dollars filtered through the city won't reach us. On January 7th, when official systems failed, residents led. We coordinated rescues. We knocked on doors. We saved lives. 10 months later, we're still leading because local government won't. Our elderly residents deserve to return home safely. They deserve emergency systems that work. They deserve a government that responds. Since local government cannot or will not provide this, we're asking the federal government to empower us to lead our own recovery. We know our community. We saved our neighbors. Now we're asking for the resources and authority to rebuild our homes. Thank you.
You know, Jesse, you talked about the evacuations. If you, Irma, which I think was like 2017 when I was governor, we evacuated 6 million people. And it was bigger in size than the state of Florida. And that's what saved lives. You got to get, and you got to get people out early. You can't wait. You know, I mean, roads get back, all this stuff happens. So, but thank you for what you've done. Next, we're going to hear from John Alley. John is a longtime resident and business owner in the Pacific Palisades who has been deeply involved in the community's recovery efforts following the fire. Thank you for being here, and please begin your testimony.
Thank you, Senators Johnson and Scott, and to your staffs for your time and patience. I'm here representing the voice of my dad, 99 years old, my deceased mom, who didn't make it, in part because of confusion from the fire, my sister, her husband, and her kids. I'm one of 7. We all made our homes in the Palisades. We're all displaced. And before I go into the fact that I was the last person to speak with LA Mayor Karen Bass before she departed for Ghana on Saturday, January 4th, I want to say what comes from my heart. Our mayor, our governors, our 3rd District County supervisors' actions, their inactions, their unwillingness or lack of thought to call meetings with city, county, and state department heads to plan, assess, question, even discuss our resources, how our city and community were prepared for an emergency or evacuation. Eventually, every city has that. Caused death, caused relocation of families, directly affected the safety of our children, our parents, our peers, and our treasured aged. Affected our jobs, our economic health of our entire city. Our community was kept in the dark for days. In a sense, it still is. Their silence, concealment, lack of transparency revealed where their loyalties lie, and it's not with the residents of this community. I spoke to Karen Bass as she was boarding the plane to Ghana. We were talking about the fires. She was inquiring about another area where I own properties, MacArthur Park, Westlake area. We discussed predicted winds. I was concerned because of the daily and nightly 18-inch fires by meth users and addicts running wild in the park and next to buildings. I was concerned that that community would burn immediately since the buildings are 30s and 40s era construction. We discussed her leaving LA without a deputy mayor in place, in charge of Homeland Security, police, fire, airport. Deputy Mayor Brian Williams was on paid leave while the FBI investigated his reporting of false bomb threats at LA City Hall. Even our own police chief was not aware that Brian Williams was on paid leave. She seemed intent on leaving, became angry and personally threatening on the phone when I voiced my concerns. She told me she would miss just 2 days. I responded by saying she'd be away 5 days, that being mayor of the nation's second largest city was a 24/7 job, and that Saturdays and Sundays counted. Upon her return, after the Palisades, my hometown burned, and my family lost their homes, everything over 50 years worth. I continued texting Karen Bass and leaving voicemail messages. She never returned my calls or responded to my text messages again. Irresponsible, not right. I arrived 2 miles away in the Palisades at about 4 p.m. and evacuated my parents at about 5 p.m. With just a few hours away, just within a few hours, the skies turned black. There was no warning. There were no calls. The only call I received was from a kind member of this Legion at 4:30 asking if he could help. No police, no fire. There were no police cars or fire trucks seen as we left, except on Pacific Coast Highway. This area was left to burn. I've returned back every single day. I returned back that night, walked the streets, watched my sister's house burn. There were no police or fire. Pacific Coast Highway was clogged. Traffic was not moving and full of stationary trucks and firefighters. I turned and exited with my parents via Sunset Boulevard. Large 2-foot wide cinders were blowing. My parents were traumatized. My mom was confused and remained so until she died 7 months later, in part because of confusion and trauma. Many of hers and my dad's contemporaries and friends also died that lived within just a few blocks, just within walking distance of here. I do not believe in coincidences. Their depression, confusion, forced relocation, and angst had lots to do with lots of deaths. I returned the very next morning on June 8th with a friend and have done so every day since. Less than 10 hours following moving my parents to temporary housing, we parked on Allenford, about 2 miles away near Paul Revere Junior High School. We hiked the whole Palisades. Homes, structures in the Riviera area. Will Rogers, the Alphabet Streets, the Huntington were still burning. The commercial district was burning. Overhead power lines were sizzling and burning. Brand new fire roads for fire trucks in Potrero Canyon, the new canyon adjacent to our Palisades Recreation Center. They were never used. The gates were never opened. Portions of the park smoldered for days after. We learned from out-of-town, out-of-state firefighters that the fire that started January 1 and was never really extinguished is what's called a slumber fire. In the Midwest, these fires occur, they're not put out, and they occur even after 6-foot-high snowpacks. And the next spring, when the winds come up, the fires occur again. Fires on our property were still smoldering 4 days after the initial fire. Fire hydrants were dry, but streets were flooded by water from homes, gushing from water lines inside where sinks and showers once were. Exterior garden connections. The Department of Water and Power never responded. despite many calls. Our councilwoman, Tracy Park, was our only source of help. She had family come out and direct Southern California Edison to try to turn off the flames from fireplaces and stoves during winds, which were still 5 and 6 feet high after the fire. For 7 days following the fire, we saw only crews and trucks from other California cities, Mexico, out of state. And interestingly, a lime-colored fire truck with the words alluding to the governor's Newsom fleet remained parked in the driveway of one of his supporters on Chautauqua Boulevard near Almaloya Drive. Crews from that truck stayed, even as other homes across the street burned. Crews removed fallen trees and branches leaning against that existing 2-story house. We freely accessed other areas burned on motor scooters that we rented in Santa Monica. Firefighters, police never access the newly constructed roads for emergencies, mainly in Potrero Canyon. Potrero Canyon is in the dead center of the Huntington, Alphabet Streets, and all of the streets north towards Palisades High. They all burned. Stating they were unable to spread the fire, stop the spread, we were told by out-of-state firefighters that they let part of the Huntington burn. They drew a line in the sand so that the fire wouldn't cross into Santa Monica. We saw countless hoses abandoned 3 days later. They were never used, and they were worn out, never used, fire hydrants that were never used. We thought it was weird. We saw one gasoline canister thrown and then left alongside burned hillside of Chautauqua Boulevard, leading to PCH. We informed a nearby fire truck and were told to report it to Fire Station 69, the main station here. We went there. We were told to take the canister to LA County near Leo Carrillo Beach, 40 minutes away, to the arson division. We didn't do that. We left it. The back portion of those homes burned. The city has paused, not waived permit fees for homes with the very same plans. So for 2,000 to 3,000 square foot homes, the permit fees are going to range from $60,000 to $80,000. That is awful. Overhead electrical lines are something the city needs to take care of. The whole city. This city helps other portions of LA, or this community. All of LA should pitch in and help the Palisades. Every elementary, middle, high school in the Palisades was burned. Every synagogue and church was burned or destroyed. I attended Corpus Christi at Sunset and Cary, directly across the street from Fire Station 69. It was destroyed. But here's what's so interesting.
Fire station.
Pardon?
Across from a fire station.
And here's what's so interesting. The parish, rectory, and convent were cleared by the Army Corps of Engineers. Late, but in the same manner as other house debris was cleared for property owners who signed in. One of the last changes former President Joe Biden made in early January was to exclude churches from being cleared by the Army Corps of Engineers, houses of worship. The announcement became public only about 60 to 90 days ago. So churches were forced quickly to remove debris at their own cost with deadlines imposed by the mayor, Mayor Bass, who said she would proclaim those sites public nuisances and penalize the ownerships if they weren't cleared promptly. In summary, we've lost 2 generations of Palisadians who saved for years and sacrificed to live near the ocean with clean air in a community with so much spirit and hometown pride. Families had dispersed everywhere. And today, the LA Fire Department still has its fire department underfunded. to less than it was 4 years ago. We have fire trucks that are disbanded in city yards that are still unrepaired as they were before the fire. Our mayor knew about this. Our governor knew about it. And if they didn't, they should have called meetings regularly to say, hey, it's a business. If we have a problem, what do we need to do to prepare? Transients have now begun entering the Palisades. Instead of having to hide in the brush along PCH, they openly roam the streets. Tagging and graffiti on remaining residential walls have surfaced. And homeless are found in yards and patios of damaged houses and alongside pools that are vacated. My street. Under pressure, Mayor Bass authorized police patrols and 24/7 officers, 24/7 officers, about 2 or 3 patrol calls to fund she didn't have enough, so she funded private security patrol companies. Funding for it that was recently cut. And at the same time, the same number of police were assigned, the same number of police that were cut were assigned to protect, for a time being, former President Kamala Harris when her Secret Service protection ended. Her protection finally ended because of public outcry, because of all of us here. The California Highway Patrol was instructed to hand out citation tickets for people going 5 or 10 miles above the speed limit when street speed limits had been unilaterally lowered during this emergency. Street lights are still out. Take a drive at night. Private security tells us that wanderers and transients have begun and are still roaming the streets. The mayor and heads of DWP, the gas company, and the insurance company still command high salaries, perks, and travel benefits. The mayor has not implemented the salary cut she agreed to in February, March, and April of this year on network and cable TV in front of neighborhood groups she addressed. From my perspective, in summary, and so many of my coworkers and neighbors and tenants, Karen Bass, our governor, our county supervisor have failed us. They've ruined community trust. There's no accountability, and they're living in an inverted reality, simply putting in the time for a paycheck and a pension. The number of her evening fundraisers, by the way, has increased dramatically. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Now I would like to recognize Bruce and Rachel Schwartz. Bruce and Rachel are son and mother, survivors of the Pacific Palisades fire who lost their home and nearly all their belongings in the January fire. In the months since, they've become strong advocates for fire recovery and preparedness, sharing their personal story to shed light on the challenges families face when navigating insurance claims, rebuilding permits, and the emotional aftermath of losing a home. Thank you both for being here, and please begin your testimony.
Thank you, Senator. Excuse me. Thank you, Senator Scott and Senator Johnson. My name is Bruce Schwartz. Rachel is my mom. I've been a resident of Pacific Palisades for 25 years. And during that time, I've had the honor of serving as honorary fire chief and being recognized as Citizen of the Year for my efforts to promote fire safety in our community. On October 23rd, 2024, our Homeowners Association's insurance policy was dropped by State Farm. The only coverage we could obtain was through the California Fair Plan at twice the cost and for less than half the coverage. Just 76 days later, tragedy struck. 17 of the 25 homes in our townhome community burned to the ground. We were so severely underinsured that rebuilding required an affirmative vote of 75% of our homeowners. That vote failed because some homeowners whose homes did not burn refused to approve an assessment to help those of us who lost everything. So now we have no home and no right even to rebuild one. To make matters worse, some of my neighbors will be forced to surrender their home to their lenders, and they will face devastating tax consequences on the cancellation of debt because the federal $750,000 exemption for forgiven mortgage debt has not been extended into 2026. Imagine losing your home, then being taxed on the loss. How can our government allow this to happen to its most vulnerable citizens? California policies have created a broken insurance market. When the winds came, the fire reignited with catastrophic force. Meanwhile, the Los Angeles Fire Department had no water pressure because the reservoirs were down for maintenance. Firefighters were forced to abandon our community and tell residents, run for your life. Now we are left with nothing. Eventually, we will receive insurance checks covering less than 20% of losses. And many of my neighbors, already traumatized, will face hundreds of thousands of dollars in new tax liabilities. Again, I ask, how is any of this fair? How is this justice for the hardworking citizens who did everything right, only to be left with nothing? We deeply appreciate your presence today and your willingness to investigate this matter. Our community needs help, accountability, and real reform. Thank you.
Rachel, you're up.
I am up. I'm very proud of my son because have learned just many things right now. So
I think
it
he's proud
has
of
to
you
be
too.
acknowledged to the senators and all the ladies and gentlemen here. Okay. Now it's my turn. Dear Senator Scott and Senator Johnson, my name is Rachel Schwartz, and I am 94 years old. Normally, I don't acknowledge as a woman my age, but today it was necessary. I don't usually testify at government hearings, but I felt I had to do it. I have been through a lot in my life. As a little girl, I survived 3 concentration camps and 3 weeks march before being freed by Russian and American soldiers. I was born in Warsaw, Poland. Somehow, by God's grace, I made it through. I came to this country when I was 15 years old, started over and made a life I was proud of. For the past 25 years, I lived peacefully in my home in the Pacific Palisades. I worked almost 35 years as a real estate, doing accounting to have the money to purchase this home. I lived peacefully in my home in Pacific Palisades. It was my safe place filled with memories, family photos, and the comfort I had waited my whole life to feel. Then the fire came. I watched everything I owned disappear in flames. At my age, it's not easy to begin again. I've been with my insurance company for over 25 years, always paid my premiums, never missed a payment, and now they tell me they will not cover, they will only cover about half of what I need to rebuild. It's not right. There are many seniors here in the Palisades who are in the same situation. We've all done our part, lived honest lives, and now we are left with almost nothing. It doesn't seem fair after all the years. Senators, I am not asking for pity. I am asking for help, not just for me, but for everyone who has lost their homes and feels forgotten. Please do what you can to make sure insurance companies are held to their promises, especially for older people who have been loyal customers for decades. We just want to live out our remaining years with dignity and peace in the homes and communities we love. Thank you for allowing me to testify. With heartfelt gratitude, Rachel Schwartz. I will not mention the negligence that took place in the Pacific Palisades. Everybody is aware of it. We've read about it, we've heard about it, and now our senators are finding out what went out here. Thank you, senators, for being here, and thank you for allowing me to testify. With heartful gratitude, Rachel Schwartz.
Good job.
Rachel, thank you for testifying, and you're blessed that you survived the Holocaust. And I'm sorry you've gone through this, but thank you for your testimony. So, Senator Johnson, you want to start?
Yeah, I've got all kinds of questions. First of all, Mr. Alley, I was intrigued by, you were the last one to talk to Mayor Bass. Why, in what capacity, what connections you had to the mayor?
I had reached out to her about a year before the fire because of the awful conditions in the MacArthur Park, Westlake area of LA, where 8 people overdose a year. And we have the smallest fire department and the busiest in the country attending to people overdosing and fires. And I was afraid, so I wanted her to make sure. She lives 4 miles away in Windsor Square. And I was concerned for my community there, 40,000 people that don't drive within 1 square mile, 2 and 3 kids that live in a 1-bedroom apartment, a famous deli that's a tenant of mine, and numerous churches and tenants, Langer's Deli, suffering.
So you reached out to her as just a normal citizen. You'd
We
not have a
spoke-
governmental connection or anything else like that.
We spoke about once or twice a month,
Oh, okay.
and she called me that day. She called me as I was parking my car. I picked up the phone and the conversation began. And it wasn't pleasant. I felt threatened, and I felt like she knew what was going on, but didn't want to acknowledge it and wanted to get out of town.
So that sets up my next question to, quite honestly, whoever wants to answer it is, why haven't California and LA elected officials done more? I mean, anybody have a theory on that? Mr. Dorian?
I would say because it's they're a small group, they're isolated in their own fantasy world. It's the state is no longer a two-party system. It's a one-party system. When they decided to allow the top two vote getters, whether Republican or Democrat, to run for any office, you don't have a Democrat running against a Republican. And now with Prop 50, we're going to be down to, instead of, 52 congressmen in our state, and now we're going to be down, and there's 43 or 4 that are Democrat and 9 that are Republican, and we're going to lose another 4 or 5 seats based on the redistricting that they just passed.
So yeah, I know how Governor Scott handled disasters. He was there constantly. I mean, he went down and he stayed down until things got recovered. Were there promises made, and I'll ask this one to Mr. Schwartz, I mean, were there promises made right after the disaster of things they were going to do that they haven't followed up on?
Well, yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, the governor, within a week after the fire, promised what he called a California Marshall Plan to rebuild the community. The mayor, I think, realizing that there was a threat, an evanescent one of a recall, made a lot of promises about getting the city back, the community back on its feet, but none of that has materialized. To the first question that you asked, I'd say the following. One, the state is operating at a $12 billion deficit, which makes resource allocation in the best of circumstances challenging. Number two, the city is operating at a $1 billion deficit for fiscal year 25-26. And yet, in August of this year, the city approved a $2.6 billion modernization of the LA Convention Center. When one factors in borrowing costs, that will approach close to $5.9 billion. Even the city's chief administrative officer acknowledged that it won't get done in time for the Olympics, and it will operate at a net loss. So we're going to see a compounding impact on sacrifices to infrastructure as well as public safety. This is just a terrible and misguided public policy decision. But it also reflects, in my judgment, the fact that if Palisades is not politically enough important to those who are in City Hall, it's not going to get the attention, and it hasn't.
So elected officials really feel pressure from their constituents, but also from a responsible news media. Do we have a lot of news media pressure on those government officials in terms of, asking the questions? You made all these promises back in January. Why aren't you delivering on those? And anybody can take that.
I don't believe we have a responsible news media locally. I've been to numerous news conferences. They want to get the next interview. They want to have access. They're not going to ask the tough questions, and they haven't. One of the other reasons, following up on David's comment, was during Mayor Villaraigosa's tenureship here, maybe in 2014, people don't realize how much money is being socked away that we don't know for the sanctuary city, sanctuary state status. Now, I'm half Mexican, quarter Mexican. I'm a quarter Lebanese. My parents, my grandparents are immigrants. I'm all for a diverse population, but we don't know, and it's against the law for our city council and our state to tell us how much is being spent for illegal immigrants for healthcare, welfare, housing vouchers, etc. We don't know.
Well, we have seen a couple reports nationally about $160 billion a year spent at all local levels of government, federal, state, and local. But again, you don't have an inquisitive press trying to press the mayor, trying to press the governor in terms of how much are we spending on the illegal immigrant population versus what's going to be available to rebuild Palisades?
I don't believe so.
Just to quickly add to the point, after the fire, citizens, news outlets, social media, voices inundated the city with Public Records Act requests, California state equivalent of FOIA. They got in return a blanket letter saying we're too overwhelmed with these requests to answer them in any timely or complete manner. And that is a violation both of the Public Records Act and as well as of the Sunshine Act under the California Constitution. So we can put some focus on the failure of the media to be dogged enough, but you're experiencing the same issue, I suspect. If you can't get the answers out of City Hall, you're not going to get the story. Now, most of this information should be a matter of public record. They can invoke, as they have, blanket exemptions, which I'm sure you will be dealing with, as to why an ongoing investigation requires them to continue to shelter the information. Those can be broken through. Those are things that courts ultimately will break through if there was enough of a public urgency and compelling need to get those answers. So I would urge the committee, to the extent that your subpoena power doesn't do the trick, and I hope it does, that it ought to make the point that the California Constitution also carries citizen the presumption of openness. Thank you.
Well, again, I see a number of media outlets here. My appeal to you is start putting pressure on elected officials here. It's got to come from the media. It's one of the main reasons that Senator Scott decided to hold this hearing here is to draw attention to it so that constituents as well as the media start asking those questions. But I've got more, but why don't you go ahead?
So, thank you, Senator. So let's start with the beginning. So you guys lived here. So you saw all the, it's pretty, right? The surrounding hills and all that stuff. It's a beautiful area, but you see all this brush and you see all this. Did anybody ever talk to you about the fact that you need to do prescribed burns? You need to clean out the brush. You needed to have fire breaks and all that. Did that ever happen? That would ever, because you have winds, you have heat, you have this. It's not like it just changed yesterday.
The fire department would send notices out to homeowners requiring them to clear brush on their property, but only up to the edge of their property. State park, no, that's a state thing. So no.
We'd been asking for our government to do their part in clearing the brush around this community for decades. I've sat on the community council board for almost 20 years. And that conversation is an ongoing yearly conversation. We bring out fire specialists who come and talk to us about how to keep our homes safe. But again, just like Tom mentioned, once it goes beyond the boundaries of what we can control directly, we have been unable to get the resources required to protect the perimeter of our community. Of course, living in a high fire severity zone, that is critical for us, but we've never been able to accomplish that.
You guys pay taxes?
We pay the highest
Quite a bit.
taxes in the city.
So you pay your taxes.
Mm.
Okay, so you've got state lands and they're not doing prescribed burn. What about the city? When they come, like what Tom said, they come to houses and tell you that you have too much brush. What about the city property? Were they cleaning up theirs every day?
I'm pretty sure the Department of DWP's locations were cleared.
So
Yeah, they took care of their own,
They took care of their location.
but we had a reservoir, a 117 million gallon reservoir that was empty since April of 2024 because there was tear in the cover, the cover that was installed in 2012 because they were worried about from 9/11, they were worried about terrorism and contamination of the water. Well, that reservoir was built for fire prevention. That was back in the seventies, that reservoir.
So it
was
wasn't drinking water.
constructed. Initially, it was not drinking. There were no homes up there. Barely any. I think they just started building homes up there. So in 19.
Don't you have two reservoirs? You had
We have
the
the,
big one, then you had the small one.
we
close to
have one at
Spencer's
the,
house.
we have one at the top of Chautauqua.
And was that, where was?
That
what
was drained for maintenance, but with no intention of ever refilling it.
Did they tell you?
No, it just, I thought the reason my water ran out at 9:30 was because that reservoir went dry. Okay,
So both reservoirs were empty.
correct.
And did they tell the citizens?
We knew that San Ynez was empty. You could see it. But there was no, they put out for bid, and the bid they got, which was from the company that installed it, was twice as much as they had budgeted for. So, and it was the only bid. There was no reason to have a cover on that reservoir. I don't care how dirty the water gets. It's not, as if it was there for firefighting, which it was. They say they committed it to drinking water. I'd like to see them prove that. I did have a friend at DWP who told me that they had 3 pumps fail in the area. And then when I spoke to him a couple weeks later, he said,
So what was their plan? If they didn't have water in the reservoir by Spencer's house and they didn't have in the big reservoir, what was their?
they pull it from Stone Canyon or one of the other reservoirs. It's got to be pumped into the area. San Ynez was the higher elevation, which, so it's gravity fed. It would feed, I assume, the Chautauqua Reservoir, but
Okay, so number one, they didn't do prescribed burn and clean the brush.
Just quick
Yeah.
ask.
that's state.
Do you know why the state didn't clear their own brush, their own properties? Do they give any reason?
Well, it's a philosophical difference in land management. They control, they not using good common sense, like for example, the indigenous people that lived here years ago used to start fires in the wintertime when there was plenty of moisture, so they burned slow and clear brush off so that there wouldn't be a giant firestorm from overgrown brush. But a philosophical decision was made to not allow cattle to be run, livestock to be run, which could have helped manage the grasses and manage the overgrowth. And because of a philosophical difference in land management.
What's that philosophical difference?
Well, depending on, it's just, I don't know if you could say it's political or not, but years before the Santa Monica Mountains, before it became a national recreation area, there were people that ran cattle and livestock. But as soon as the park, the national recreation area was created, they came up with a policy that no cattle, no brush management, that let it grow naturally, because for what reason, I don't know. But if you look back on this, you'll see that. John, go ahead.
I'll just say it out loud. I've been told by state legislators that lack of means to do it, a lack of will. And let's put the words out there.
But lack of means, just so, I bet they spend twice what I spent as governor per person in this state.
The other reason,
Or
climate
the entire
change.
state budget. I bet it's twice I haven't looked at the exact numbers, but New York is twice per person is what I spent in Florida, almost per person. We were able to do, fire prevention, right? So it's not, it's lack of interest in doing it.
Lack of interest. And the words climate change, somehow that gets involved in this safety. The other thing, it's very interesting. That reservoir that Tom is referring to, it's always been meant for fire prevention. 2 months ago, the mayor or her staff or minions changed the city website to label that reservoir as a drinking facility, means for drinking water, maybe in part. But if you look at our website for the city of LA, the definition of that reservoir has changed. Why? Liability.
You know what? Can I jump in and just comment on that?
Hi.
I think it was about a month before the fire. Somewhere in December of 2024, there was a brush fire right next to the reservoir.
Right.
Beautiful day, versus, yeah. And that's where the LA City Fire Department will bring helicopters and go up and do all that. It's just interesting that there's absolutely no sense of. It's just not. This thing. Something really.
Plus what, you know, I just tell you in my state, so I live in the south part of the Florida. I live in Naples. So between Naples and Fort Lauderdale, we have the Everglades, right? So it gets dry and it depends on the year, June, July, and August. And so that's where, you know, that's where we'll have a potential fire. So we know it. And so, you know, we prepare for it, and we have plenty of, you're ready for it. And so you do prescribe burns around the state and stuff like that. So it just doesn't make sense. So they don't do anything to get, I don't know, David, do you want to add something?
Just,
before?
yeah, I think it is very easy for bureaucracies to pass responsibility. And in this case, you have a division of responsibility because the most vulnerable areas for fire is the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. That is the land that runs along the backbone of this city. I've lived in that neighborhood since I've been in Los Angeles for over 35 years. And the comment about it, we used to be a track for the dairy farmers to take up there. That's true. They created fire breaks. Santa Monica Mountain Conservancy has a full-time firefighting task of 30. In terms of brush clearance, in the many, many years that I lived surrounded by conservancy land, it was never touched. So you're dealing with a century-old
Think about that.
tinderbox
Yeah.
in a chimney because it sits in the canyons and goes up. And that's a very much what was experienced on these.
Do they not have the fire breaks? Because you have,
To my knowledge, certainly not enough to prevent what happened. And in fact, they're one of the things that is really critical, not only for fire prevention, but also for egress, is to protect citizens by having some way out. One of the things that led to the disaster, and it could have been.
yeah, I was going to
even-
get to evacuation. I mean, you have, so with hurricanes, what we have is we know how early we have to evacuate people because we know how, you know, the roads, and we have paths for people to get out,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So, but just finish on the forest and stuff. So everybody knew it, and there was just but nothing happened, right?
Look, in 1966, some of the residents here may have been around for the Bel Air fire. The number one reason why that was a terrible fire, and the lesson that was supposed to have been learned from that is not only to have better fire breaks, but also to have, you know, gravity-driven water sources.
Right.
And of course, the fact that the San Ynez Reservoir was under maintenance is just that it was there to serve that purpose. It was built in the wake of that fire.
So it was gross incompetence and gross negligence. That's what drove this, right?
100%, 100%.
I mean, let's not mince words. I mean, gross incompetence, gross negligence.
And
had-
complacency.
You had firefighters on site on January 2nd, working to put the fire out, keep the smoldering fire the day after the January 1st fire, the Lockman fire. And you had one of their commanders say, all right, pack it up, let's go.
Why?
And the firefighter, there's text messages. The LA Times reported on this just recently that they were ordered by a battalion chief to pack it up. And on January 7th, the Station 69 was not in the Palisades on the morning of January 7th. It was in Hollywood. And the Station 69 and Station 23 are, years ago, I was told by a fire captain, they stay in the Palisades specifically for this type of event. and they were sent, our engine was sent out of our town.
It doesn't make sense.
So can I just help paint a little bit of a picture? So we're one community of the city of Los Angeles, one of the biggest cities in the world. And the city is pulled in so many directions.
But you do pay your taxes.
We pay, again, the highest taxes in the city of Los Angeles. And so we foot the bill mostly for most other communities in this city. We're a city, such an incredibly diverse city that has also been under the whims of a massive humanitarian crisis for almost 20 years now, and a horrendous drug epidemic. And our public officials are pulled in many directions, and we know that public officials are always looking to get reelected. Our community has never taken precedent over any of the issues that we face. Since the inception of this community, since World War II, we have mostly taken care of ourselves because we love where we live, and it is the American dream, and it is an incredibly beautiful, magical place that's nestled in the Santa Monica Mountains, right on the edge of the ocean. It is an incredibly rare spot. And so people who move here are willing to do the work and the effort to stay here. And the city knows it, and they could charge us really high taxes because it's a really highly desirable place to live. But if you put that in context, it helps you understand why when they're facing an Inside Safe program that our mayor created when she first became mayor for the homeless population that assisted a little over 5,000 people, actually only housed a little under 1,500 people, and spent 326 million, or it's 300 and some, let's just say, $1 million in this program. If we had those $300 million here for our community, most people would be able to return home.
What would it cost to rebuild the cover of the reservoir?
$125,000 was the quote.
$125,000.
Mhm.
And they spent three. So Tommy brought up this fact that the firefighters left. Wasn't there a report?
Yes,
Didn't they-
well, their text in between firefighters stating that, and this was I assume a Freedom of Information Act from the LA Times, that stated that, hey, we were forced to leave. They're still smoldering. There's video on the day after, on the second of smoke coming up out of the ground, and the firefighters were told to leave.
Was that in the report? Did they
No,
put
it was not.
Why not?
Gosh, I don't know. Why would you put it in the report?
Well, if you're supposed to get better,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if you think about disasters, nothing goes perfect, right? So, but you have to get better. You're not gonna get better if you don't do it.
Yeah.
What I've watched, and I'm not a firefighter, but what I've watched in Florida, I'm close to the Everglades, so that's where you see, that's where we have fires every so often. I mean, they put a lot, they stay there, and they're constantly putting water on it. Seems like it's all done, but they're constantly putting water on it, turning the ground, and constantly.
That was,
And they didn't do any of that.
they did not do that. They were, the ground was hot, the rocks were hot, the smoke was coming up from the roots, and it just festered there for a week.
So what about evacuations? Did a city or a county or a state person call each of your families to tell you should evacuate?
No, in the past, we have fires all the time. We're in a high fire severity zone. We have.
So, they knew you have fires? So it's sort of a
They-
common thing?
It's a very common thing
They're put out.
to have fires, and our firefighters put them out immediately. And they're most of the time, they're people on drugs who light up fires, arsonists, or warming fires from our homeless population that are coming through. And our firefighters do an incredible job of stopping the fires immediately. We were warned, and the media was very vocal about the fact that we were going to have incredibly high winds. They started a new program this year, and I think they called them red flag days. And I remember them well because my son goes to school in a high fire severity zone. And so every time they had a red flag day, actually in Topanga, they turn out the power. They did not turn out the power in the Pacific Palisades.
This was on what day? The 7th?
This is on the 7th.
Seventh,
The
yeah.
power was not turned off. But in Malibu and Topanga, they've been turning off the power ahead of the winds to protect and so that the fire wouldn't reoccur, because Malibu and Topanga have learned some lessons, different jurisdiction. On the day of the evacuation, I kept looking and checking my phone for the messaging, because we know that if they tell you the difference between there's a fire in your area, 1, 2, prepare for a potential evacuation, which means just get your stuff, the important bits at the front door, just in case you need to go. And then there's the mandatory, I think sometimes they do a suggested evacuation and then a mandatory evacuation. It should have been a mandatory evacuation the second that fire started. It was obvious to everybody in that community. It was visible. That didn't come. I got a suggestion text message,
When?
prepare to evacuate, around 12:30 p.m.
On the 7th?
on the 7th.
On the 7th. Okay.
I got a mandatory evacuation when all the homes on my side of my street burned at 5 p.m. Those homes burned
On the
between
7th?
on the 7th. Those homes burned between 4 and 4:30 p.m.
So, okay, we know the reservoirs were negligently not filled. We know that brush was left unremoved negligently. All kinds of warnings about, again, these high winds are not a unusual thing. This is something, and it's also predictable. So we were told as we were touring that instead of pre-positioning fire trucks where you normally pre-position them, they were down the beach.
Yes.
How do they explain that? I mean, why wouldn't you have fire trucks, go back to that spot? Okay, you maybe were pulled off at one point in time, but go back there where it still may be smoldering. Any explanation of why they didn't pre-position fire trucks?
There was no evacuation plan. Where fire originated up at the top of the highlands, residents of the highlands down Palisades Drive because it was just cars trying to get down to Sunset Boulevard stage. Time, or couldn't even get up there because of all of it. Everybody was told by the APD to abandon their cars. Somewhere, a tractor came in, pushed the cars out of the way. So the fire trucks could get up. A couple hours later.
But again, any explanation of why you didn't have pre-positioned fire assets?
What I was told, because I was there every single day. And what I was told in front of our house was from a firefighter in a truck was, John, we couldn't have saved your house or the block or the area. Our hydrants weren't working, and each truck holds 500 gallons of water. He said 500 gallons of water doesn't go very far.
But there are swimming pools in the area, correct? And they have the capability of pumping water out of swimming pools, correct?
Where I live, guards and residents were going into pools. They were taking beer. They were doing everything they could to put out sparks of fire along the Amalfi Ridge, not El Real, but Amalfi, because it was spreading. And they succeeded. But again, like Jessica was saying, that was residents. It wasn't firefighters. It was guards.
There was a gentleman over here that's raising his hand.
For the media, but I'm also a resident. To answer that question, you need to look at a decision that was made by the fire department on the 6th of January. When decided not to position certain assets, the city of LA Fire Department. My belief is that they made that decision because of the high cost of overtime. Move the units into position, nothing happens, we paid everybody overtime, nothing. And they were under severe budget pressure. The city's $18 million budget cut to the fire department, so they were looking for areas to save. Decided not to move the trucks into position January 6th. I think you can find notes of that meeting, and you can find people who were there and made those decisions. It's one of the reasons I think the mayor fired the fire chief afterward. It's the only public official who's been held accountable. So you can argue that it obviously was not just her decision. The city council voted on that budget. All of that was put into place before she had to make that call. But I think that meeting, when we decided what to do, decided not to pre-deploy, is really where you want to look.
And Senator, one of the text messages that was published in one of the newspapers and verified was that every fire truck has a paramedic. It's not just an ambulance, paramedic on every fire truck. And the city wanted to make sure that there were enough fire trucks for other areas of the city for people that might be experiencing heart attack or a drug overdose. They needed paramedics. And that was one of the reasons floated. Frankly, understaffed, underfunded.
He's got a question right there.
Yeah, but do you want, oh, you want to go ahead and add first? Okay.
You had asked about what happened with the evacuation. And something that I think is really important to know. We were up at the top of Palisades Drive. We evacuated.
What day?
This was on 7th.
7th.
Fire. When it was time to leave, and we were told that we need to evacuate.
Who told you?
Neighborhood.
And
They just did
so the
that.
government didn't tell you? No government official ever told you?
Whoever from the government. We drove down Palisades Drive, eventually with a caravan of 3 cars, made it all the way to Sunset and Pacific Coast Highway. And we got blocked by the police department. Said PCH South is closed, you have to go north. Looked at them and said, I see nothing but black smoke, there's no way to go through. They said, it's closed, that's the way you have to go. And I led the caravan of our family in 3 cars around burning things where we couldn't see it.
Why did they close it?
Because there was fire to the south. So we had to go north through conditions.
So they had fire to the south, fire to the north, and nobody asked for evacuation.
It's even worse than that, because as we had to wind through, had to open the car door to stare at the center line of the street through ash to stick, to keep my car on the road, so we knew where we were driving. Finally got through the fire to Topanga Canyon.
What time was this?
About, by the time we got through about 5 o'clock, by the time we got to Topanga, they stopped us at Topanga Canyon. And they said, you can't go this way, you have to go back to Sunset. And they made us drive through it again. We got back to Sunset. Having done the exact same thing, and they stopped us there, and the police said, sorry, you can't go this way. You still have to go north. They sent us through it a 3rd time, the barbecue, up to Topanga Canyon. To be honest with you, we finally got there, and the officer went like this and said, I'm sorry, you have to go this way. And my daughter and my wife following in cars finally said, I'd rather you just shoot me in the head than have me burn alive in this fire. And we bellied our car up to the edge of the cruiser. And we made space. And we actually drove through the block and had all of our cars drive past to safety. Because once we got through.
Did you want to add? Yeah. What if you're a senior? What happened to, oh, yeah.
My,
Okay. Yep. And then did you want to add something also?
Gonna say, our communications for self-service in the Palisades are bad. So I happen to.
Anyway, normal.
We run neighborhood watch and we have a WhatsApp. We actually did get temporary, prepare to evacuate and evacuation notices before noon. We could see it above us, but that was it. We didn't get any others, but I think other areas of the Palisades may not have gotten it. And the cell service doesn't work. So if that's the only method of communication, we didn't get any kind of reverse phone. We have regular.
And nobody came to your door or anything?
no.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, first of all, thank you. This is the most encouraged I've felt not getting to the bottom of what's going on since the president was here. I've heard much since then. It occurs to me that a lot of the questions you're asking, there's a ton of discovery done already in the lawsuits that have been filed. I'm a person that reads those things. And I know your counsel is here with you. I would just suggest, use that as a resource. Any one of us, including my, there's a lot of pain in this room. Seeing it, I'm so glad I came to hear it, share it, and let me find across 2 homes. And just look at some of those legal filings. All the questions you're asking, they have been researched in these filings and answered definitively already. Everybody that's here chime in and doing a great job in doing it, and then also want to thank all the folks that shared their personal stories. But that's my comment. I want to look at that.
David, did you want to add something?
Well, I would say 3 things quickly. The question of forward deployment is a really critical one, but the starting point for the analysis is that hotspot that went where the arson allegedly began, and that it became a slumber fire. We know this because the U.S. attorney, when he announced the indictment, explained in great detail what ATF found. So they have all the answers with respect to the amount of time LAFD sat on that hotspot when they left. Obviously, hindsight being what it is, one could say persuasively that they should have been there until the red flag warnings were dropped. And the second point goes to Senator Johnson's comment about available sources of water, and the LAFD's October 8th Palisades Fire After Action report lists as one of several secondary challenges the loss of water. And I would say it was a polite way of saying there was a catastrophic failure of the static and water supply systems. At least is a concession that loss of water occurred as of around 2000 hours. But then the report seeks to shift responsibility on the decreased water volume to homeowners who continue to operate automatic sprinklers in hopes of saving their properties. I don't remember, maybe you know, Tom, but I think there was upwards of 22 million gallons of water that should have been in that drained reservoir. So anyone who's operating their pathetic little garden
That's the one
hose,
at the top.
cannot be appropriately blamed for the loss of the water pressure. The third point is the one that Senator Johnson raised about siphoning water from swimming pools. The average swimming pool holds anywhere from 12 to 15,000 gallons of water. That's quite a bit larger than the 500 that the trucks carry. Imagine if the city had been prepared to deploy simple fire siphoning engines. I had one in my former home. It was essentially a 2-stroke Briggs & Stratton lawnmower engine and some fire hose. I had a fire in 2009, and it saved my house. And again, I think that these are relatively inexpensive things to insist upon if someone is going to maintain a pool. But in the meantime, the fire department should have been loaded for bear with these kinds of water siphoning pumps so that they could get into those communities and use them. My pool was left open and untouched.
Can you talk about seniors and what the plan was, and was there a plan to help seniors before? Because I guess what you said, Jessica, you guys have fires, right? So you would think that if you guys have fires, there was a plan to help our seniors.
I don't think there's a
I bel-
direct plan.
I believe I was naive. I learned a lot since the fire. I believe that there was a plan of evacuation. I thought there were basic standards for evacuation. I thought that there would be police going to every street and every home, and that there would be coordination of those events. That wasn't the case. And that is why Tracy Park's staff, our councilwoman's staff of 12, did everything they could that day to coordinate. They became these de facto coordinators, completely untrained, trying to assist residents like me who knew the danger, who knew the issues and the problems, and who were still on site and were able to tell them. I had to explain to Jacob the situation at Sunset and Palisades Drive where people couldn't get out. There was nobody there to explain it to them, and the firefighters were too busy trying to put out fires around the vehicles and the young children and pets escaping cars to report back to tell them what was actually happening. So no, there wasn't a plan in place. I wasn't aware, and there still isn't today. If a fire occurred right now, we're in the safest building in this community, so that's a good thing. But this community is still incredibly unsafe to live in, and there is no plan. They didn't have people guiding traffic. This is why cars started piling up in all places. The reason why I was able to escape and out of the community, which is 1 mile away, I strategically purchased my property where I did because I knew the points of ingress and egress. And I said, I will never live north of Sunset. I believe that made me safe. I had the direct route out of the community. I was less than a block away from Temescal Canyon Boulevard. It was built to be a highway. It has 6 lanes. And I had to go into the bike lane that they built and the parking spots in order to get out. So, and that took 45 minutes, and that was at around 1:15 p.m. So there was no evacuation plan. There was no plan for seniors, none whatsoever.
Right. I just want to say when I was, I won the, back in the mid 2015, 2018, we've had several community meetings. Peter, you know about this, on fire safety at the Calvary Church. It seems to, and that is when it seems to me that the fire department, when the problem is that because of a quota by the government, we have hired unqualified people in positions to run our infrastructure, unqualified. And because of this, you have people that shouldn't have been there making these calls. Because during the 2010 to 2015 to 2020, we had Chief Armando Hogan, a Battalion Chief 9. We had meetings. What happened to those protocols? Is it because we had a new administration in there? Or I want to point out Assistant Fire Chief Patrick Butler, who was head of the brush unit for the city of Los Angeles. If he had been appointed fire chief or still had been with the city of LA, head of the brush unit, he would have never let this happen.
You have a brush unit?
Patrick Butler was head of the assistant chief, head of the brush unit for the city of Los Angeles. He was an experienced firefighter. When he got passed over to be fire chief, after 30 years of serving the city of LA, he quit and he joined the city of Redondo Beach as their fire chief. What I'm trying to point out to you that we have unqualified people running critical infrastructure in this city that don't have the experience or the common sense. A perfect example is the battalion chief who said, roll up the hoses, even though his crew told him, hey, this place is still on fire. It's smoldering. It's hot. He didn't listen to that. He didn't listen to the people in the field. They rolled the hoses up and left. If Patrick Butler had been fire chief or still with the city of LA, this wouldn't have happened. In 2019, we had a fire in Sepulveda Pass. There were fire trucks sitting there for 2 weeks after the fire was out to make sure hot spots did not occur, because everyone knows it's firefighting 101. When you have a chaparral fire like this, you're going to have smoldering debris underground, smoldering roots. This is firefighting 101. But when you have unqualified people appointed to positions of authority that don't have the experience or are unqualified, this is what can happen.
So who are appointing those unqualified, incompetent people to those positions?
I'm sorry?
Who is appointing
Mayor,
Most-
city council, board of supervisors.
It's called DEI, which we have to succumb to in LA and California.
Right. We have to hire people based on a quota of either, instead of their qualifications. We have to hire people based on a quota, for diversity, for, whatever the reason is. We did not have the qualified people in running this department because of a quota set by the federal government to hire people supposedly of diversity, whether it's whatever that means. Instead of looking at the people's qualifications, if that chief was qualified, who told him to roll up the hoses, he would have never done that. This is not our first rodeo. We know how these fires work, and they have to be watched. And especially with the fact that we had high winds, we had 4 days of weather reports saying we're going to have catastrophic winds. You'd have think somebody would have said, my God, where's the most likely place we could have a fire in the city of Los Angeles, where we just had one? Good old common sense could have prevented this.
So elected officials appoint people who are incompetent, not qualified.
I mean, they're all good
Elected officials also allocate resources to sanctuary cities, incentivizing more illegal immigrants, and they don't allocate resources to like fire trucks and to the basic priority functions of government. Public safety, police, firefighters. I mean, is that kind of a good diagnosis?
Well, it is. And, you know, I'm also on the homeless task force, and we have $2.5 billion that has been unaccounted for, that a federal judge has tried to get accounting from these nonprofits. Imagine what $2.5 billion could have done to help our infrastructure. Our priorities are flipped. They're upside down. And nothing against the people that they hired that are not competent. It's not their fault. It's because of a government protocol that says, oh, well, you must hire people of diversity instead of hiring the right people. And if it doesn't matter if they're black, white, or whatever, we need people that are qualified. And anybody, it is, the city of Los Angeles knows the protocols for fighting fire, but just like the gentleman over there said, budget constraints, or I would like to get the fire chief, assistant chief, who made that call in front of your committee, so you could ask him why.
So can we shift, because there's another component here that I think it's extremely important to talk about, is just the economics here. There will be federal funding that's going to be requested, no doubt about it. One thing I've learned when I've come here is, I think the perception here, this is Pacific Palisades, these are gazillionaires, and they're, maybe not a whole lot of sympathy for folks, but the fact of the matter is, and I want you residents to talk about this, these are, a lot of the residents there are people who've lived there for generations, bought their homes. They're not, some of these are not particularly large homes, 2,000, 3,000 square feet, kind of typical in America. You bought them at reasonable prices, a couple $100,000. And now, again, because you do have some people coming, because it's beautiful, okay? Dramatically driving up the cost. I mean, can you just describe that as what this community is actually like?
This is Tom's experience and his family that he shared. That is the typical Palisades family, generations living here and never leaving. Spencer Pratt shares it in the news all the time. He talks about his family and how they moved here and how it's generational. John Alley and his family, it's generational. They moved here a long time ago when properties. As a social worker in the Palisades, I can't tell you, I went to hundreds of people's homes, and they would be proud to tell me when they spent anywhere between $20,000 to $70,000 for their property that would now be worth the lowest, the cheapest home in the Palisades before the fire was $3 million. My home, by the way, was 1,500 square feet. It was a 1950s home. We are a middle-class community, a very mixed community socioeconomically.
So oftentimes in a situation like that where, because of the location, home values driven up, property taxes oftentimes go up and that drives people out. Is that the case? And
We have Prop 13 in the state of California, which the state government right now is trying to, they do everything they can to get rid of it.
so that does what? That holds?
That holds our property taxes at, what is it, 2% a year? They can raise our property taxes. So
Unless you sell the home.
well, yes, if you sell the home, then
Then the new homeowner comes
homeowner,
in.
boom,
Right.
it's reassessed at current market value. Case what my in-laws, they purchased their home in 1963, I believe it was. They paid $30,000 for it. Their property taxes are extremely low, but they're both retired. And you know, my mother-in-law was a housewife. My father-in-law, he was a manager at Hughes Market from when he was 16 years old. He started with Hughes, which turned into Ralph's. And he retired as a manager in a little after the year 2000. So, you know.
So you have a real disparity within the community of people who come in and bought in at those high values, paying very high property taxes versus the multi-generation homes, very low. Is that one of the reasons they charge unbelievable permitting fees? I mean, in the testimony, we had somewhere $60,000 to $100,000 of permitting fees, which is going to really hamper the rebuilding efforts, correct?
Half of the building fees, I believe, go to the schools. Half of those fees are a school or an assessment for school funding. Now we have these multi-billion-dollar lotteries that we're supposed to provide for infrastructure for schools. Those funds, where are those funds